Anyway, would like to thank you for being here this afternoon for this very important topic. We'd like to thank State Farm Insurance and Ed Rust for the luncheon. I'm sure we all enjoyed it. The Common Core standards are something that United Way of McLean County has been supporting for almost 4 years now in our partnership with the Regional Office of Education. We formed a collaboration with the ROE to develop curriculum based upon the Common Core for our online academic credit recovery program that most of the high schools in McLean County use. The Common Core's more rigorous standards and its added focus on analysis and problem solving is what our young people need to be genuinely educated young adults who are prepared for higher education, for careers, and for a highly competitive world economy. United Way does significant work in both employment and education as part of our community impact plan. Early learning, middle school success, and completing 9th grade in 1 year are just a small sample of some of the outcomes that we are trying to achieve in our education focus area. Additionally, job training and financial coaching combine to form a large part of our income portfolio. Together with many community partners, we're developing measurement framework to hold ourselves accountable and set high-value goals for the number of people and the number of households that we'll impact. Achieving these lofty goals is not going to be easy, but it's the way that we stay honest and make genuine change. Like you, we believe that expecting more from our children is the right and responsible path. There will, however, be culture shock, but if we can have a unified voice in this, we can play a role in reassuring parents, educators, the business community, and the media that however uncomfortable the adjustments, we're on the right path. We owe it to our young people and to the health of Central Illinois to have high expectations and to follow through on those expectations. We believe that education is the escalator out of poverty. So we stand with all of you on this, and we, like you, have skin in the game. At this point, I'd like to introduce our panelists who will lead our discussion on the Common Core standards. They're going to be answering your questions. Our first panelist is Illinois State Superintendent of Education, Dr. Christopher Koch. Chris has been with the Illinois State Board of Ed since 1994, serving in a variety of administrative capacities, including Director of Special Education and the state's Chief Education Officer. As State Superintendent, Chris has led efforts to bring coherence between state standards and curriculum, between assessments and college entry requirements. He supports the establishment of nationally and internationally benchmarked standards that promote rigor and relevance, as well as assessments common to all states, so that fair and accurate comparisons about student performance between states and even between countries can be made. He's an Illinois native, and from what he said, he had the rare opportunity to sleep in his own bed last night because he lives in Downs. You've already met Bob and Ed, and so I invite all three of you gentlemen to come on up here. Our moderator will be Robin Staines. She is currently the Executive Director of Advance Illinois, which is an independent statewide education policy and advocacy organization. It's dedicated to ensuring that Illinois provides a world-class education to every student. Robin taught at public high schools in Boston, San Francisco, and Chicago before going on to earn her law degree. She's an involved Chicago public school parent and a former local school council member. You should have found a pad of paper on your chairs and a pen. We ask you to please write down any questions you have, and some folks from Advance Illinois will be kind of wandering the aisles to pick up questions that you may have. So please, let's hear your questions on this. So now I'd like to pass the microphone to our moderator. Please help me welcome Robin Staines and the three panelists.
Standards or no standards, I suspect you're smart enough to know I'm Robin and that's Chris. But just in case there was any doubt, And a couple of quick housekeeping things. I know Senator Michael Frerichs joined us. I don't know how anybody missed him with his height. He must have come in afterwards. But Senator, you want to stand and just sort of wave? Oh, there you are. How I missed you as I walked by. Delighted to have you. I want to again thank State Farm for being such a terrific host, and all of our partners. Stand for Children also had helped with the event. I want to make sure that we recognize them as a co-host as well. So I do want to start. I don't want to retread ground that we've already done, but Chris, I'm going to start with you. Tell me why. We understand a little bit about how these came to be. Is anything that you want to add about how these came to be in Illinois and what you think are going to be the key? We heard from Bob that implementation of something this big is significant. How these came to be in Illinois, what you think are going to be some of the most significant challenges we face as we make this shift?
Sure. Well, as you heard, the Council for Chief State School Officers was a lead organization in these, and we quickly knew working with the National Governors Association and other nationwide organizations would make a lot of sense because we knew it was going to be a heavy lift. But it was educators and, in fact, folks in my role across the country and myself who decided that having standards that weren't all that different among each other didn't make a lot of sense. It wasn't terribly efficient, and it was time that we came up with some that really mattered. So folks need to know there's a lot of good brain power going into the development of these standards, international and national experts in the field who looked at them.
And in Illinois, too. Right?
And in Illinois. And we had many Illinois folks comment. There were both a national comment period, and also it's important to note that these were created and went through the same state regulatory process as our prior standards. So they went before the Joint Committee for Administrative Rulemaking in the General Assembly, and they had a public comment period before that and after that. And they weren't done in response to an application. They were done because we thought they were the right thing to do.
Right, they were already in motion.
They were already in motion.
I asked you to talk about challenges, but before you do, give us just one, as quick as you can, so we don't fall behind in our time here, but what makes them so different? What is, because they're not just a little tweak or an upgrade of what we had in place. They're a much more significant shift. Give us one or two examples of that.
Sure. The main things that make them different, that they require students to apply knowledge and demonstrate learning, and that they're going to require teachers to know not only the standards of students that they're teaching, but also the standards that the students should have met before and will meet afterwards in a very consistent way. And again, that they're internationally benchmarked. I think those are huge differences. But they're
what about the mile wide and inch deep? Is there a change in the amount that
change.
needs to be covered on an annual basis?
Absolutely. Our teachers, we've only heard positive feedback about these. And again, we've had these in front of our teachers now for 3 years. They were so relieved not to have this broad spectrum of standards to try to teach you, to try to develop curriculum around, that they could be focused and help students to understand critical thinking and the ability to demonstrate that. And that's a huge leap from where we were.
All right, I'm going to come back on the challenges. Sure. But Ed, if I could just ask you, you spoke to this a little bit, but you skipped over what might be tough news. When you're looking to hire, tell me what you see when employees come through the door and how that shows up. And we've got an unemployment challenge not only here but nationally. And I think sometimes, we think, gosh, there's plenty of employees. It's a jobs problem. Can you maybe offer a slightly different perspective on that?
Robin, you touched on something that really got me into this issue. And this was nearly 20 years ago, hearing from my colleagues, State Farm employees or folks in the community, youngsters, their kids applying for a job and running into a roadblock, basically is called the pre-employment aptitude. The inability to demonstrate an ability to understand numbers, to do thought process, critical thinking, word problems. And that was something, it motivated me to really start looking at the whole education system. We've seen some improvement, but I've got to tell you, this was part of what I said, the evolving or rapidly changing required skill sets and experiences that young people need today to be able to compete tomorrow are real. And it's what we still see are limitations in the ability to work together as a team. This may be a fallout from technology, but communicate in thoughtful, complete sentences, let alone paragraphs. and and the ability to read and comprehend. Because there's no point, here is a booklet, an instruction guide on how to do something. If the person looks at it, I can't read this, I don't understand it, I don't know how to really, on my own, through continuous learning, develop those skills to help me. So, we have made some progress, but we're not where we need to be. And clearly, as Bob touched on a little bit, you look internationally, and I'll be one, I did not have the opportunity as a youngster until, well, really almost 30 years of age to travel internationally. I've had a lot of that opportunity in the intervening years, and what you quickly find is that other nations are copying what we did well that gave us a competitive advantage starting back into the late 1800s, 1900s, around educating our populace. They have taken that model, turbocharged it, and are doing a far better job than we are. And in today's world of work and technology, work moves globally, and it goes where it can find people with the skill sets to be able to meet the requirements.
I'm just going to, one of the questions that I'm getting from the field, and then I am going to come to implementation challenge, but still on the why are we doing this and why does it matter and where did they come from? There is somebody in the audience says they're going to be meeting with folks who are concerned about Common Core, may even oppose Common Core tomorrow, and would love to know when you say this isn't coming from the feds, that's one of the concerns, is this just a federal mandate? We've been snookered, have we been has this been imposed? And you've indicated that that's not the case. I think that Chris, you've amplified. There was really a lot of energy, work, and buy-in at all levels here. But is there anything that you want to add to that, Bob, to make it easier for this person to respond?
Yeah, I think quite simply, the standards themselves, not one federal dollar, not 1 cent was involved in the development of, the documentation of, or the adoption of the standards. Nothing. The states and the chief state school officers were engaged in that, and educators and everybody else, as they worked through this process. So that's just factually incorrect. That's a nice way to say something. It's not true, but do whatever words you want. It just isn't true.
You want to be polite about it. You say, I think you just got that wrong.
Well, and if other people knowingly are promoting that knowingly, then that's a lie. That's what my parents taught me, and that's what my church taught me. If you don't know it's not true, but you understand it to be true, then you just misspoke, or you're saying something that's wrong. But if you know it's not true and you repeat it, then that's a lie. That's what mom and dad told me, and that's what I taught my kids. So to advance that, that's not cool. Now, the federal government did do some things. There's some funding that the federal government has done to support the states around their desire and need to put out some common assessment methods. That's federal money that's behind that. The customer is him. The customer is Chris. GE Foundation, Gates Foundation, and 2 others contributed a total of $16 million recently to give the chief state school officers full force and authority and the monies to do this, to accept, reject, and modify any of those testing documents on their consortiums, on the CCSSO, to ensure that that is not one that is federally imposed. The state's also free to choose what assessments they use. And going through, there are others coming along now that haven't been funded by.
And let's pause on that, because Chris, that was going to be one of my questions. My understanding is whenever you've got new standards, you generally need to adjust your assessments to measure the progress on those standards, as Bob was laying out. And developing new assessments, generally every state's done that on their own, and it's quite costly. And so that the fact that you've now got more common standards means that that cost can be shared. It can both be supported by the federal government or by others, but those costs can be spread among states. But does that change the fact that you've still got a choice to make? As those new assessments become available, is that something that you're going to be coerced into using? Is that something that Illinois has a choice to be using? When are we going to have to make that decision as a state? And what are you seeing as you see news about these new assessments come out? What are you liking or not liking, and how are you feeling about that?
Sure, yeah, and there will be choices to be made, and we're in the process of making a number of those now, just as we have to do. We're given a line in the state budget for assessment and assessment implementation. That's the resources that we have. The park assessment, we're part of the governing board of the park assessment, one of the federally funded
Do you remember
assessments.
what PARC stands for?
I used to, and I can't think of it right off the top of my head.
Just keeping you on your toes.
Partnership for Readiness in College and Careers is
There you
essentially
go.
what it's.
He gets one of the cupcakes for that.
I was going to get up earlier, but and there's another consortium, Smarter Balance, and there'll be other assessment products that are developed that folks say are aligned to the Common Core. But we're doing some very different things here than we've done previously. We are going to have through-course assessments, so no longer just one assessment window and venue, but we'll have multiple opportunities to assess what students are learning. And that's important because we know intervention is important in response to assessment. Our school districts have been asking for years to be able to have information they can actually use through an assessment.
And Robin, if I might add on that, it's not just the commonality of the assessment, but the timeliness of it, more current.
Exactly.
As opposed to waiting, you've spent 9 months in school, you've taken an assessment before you go home for summer, and you find out the next year how well you did or didn't.
In October, as it happens.
Right.
And it's a little hard to back up the clock to something that you weren't getting last November, and it's October this year, and because you didn't get it in November, you didn't really get anything else?
And that's only possible, incidentally, to add to Ed's point, if we have an online assessment.
Mm-hmm.
And an online assessment requires that we're also providing online instruction to students prior to giving the assessment so that they're familiar with it, and this isn't the first time they experience it in a testing venue. And we're not doing so well with our technology infrastructure in the state.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. So there are two technical challenges, and I'm going to get to the instructional challenges in a minute, but a couple of technical challenges and/or cost challenges. One is do the new tests cost more than the current tests that we're using, or is it just if we choose to move to these because we think they're better, is it going to cost the same because we're spending it? And the related second question is, if we're going to move to online assessment, because that gives us immediate feedback, teachers can get that information in real time and use it, get it to families and kids, what's it going to take us to really get the technological infrastructure in place around the state?
So the tests are comparable in cost. One issue, however, will be that in our state, for example, we surveyed our districts more than once. About 60% responded, and only about 25% of the 60% who responded would be ready. So that means we'd have to give a paper-pencil version of the test.
So they
at
could
least.
still use the test, they just
They could
wouldn't get
still use
the
it.
results as quickly.
Right, but paper-pencil versions are going to be more expensive, as much as $3 to $3.50 more per child per test administration, which adds up when you've got 2.1 million children. So that's a real concern and can add cost. And we need to be thinking about that. We are thinking about that. We've been meeting with a number of folks, the Illinois Broadband Council and others, and there's 3 levels of technology need here. Some of our districts aren't connected at all. Some of our communities aren't connected. And then you have within the school buildings additional wiring, and finally devices. All are issues.
And I would point out, and then this question's for any one of the 3 of you wants to tackle it first. Once you have that in place, you can use it for more than the assessment. You can use it for instruction. You can use it for online
everything.
distance learning. I mean, there's a
Absolutely.
whole, so I'm going to ask you, there's 2 ways to look at that. Do you look at that and say, well, that cost is a reason not to move forward with those assessments, or do you use this as an excuse to say, gosh, that's a great excuse to get stuff in schools that we need? What's the right way to, and how is that being looked at elsewhere in the country?
Yeah, I'll take a view on that, because we lead the nation in education in one thing, and that is the thickness of our textbooks. Our children probably have more chiropractic visits than any youth in the world. And part of that is because when you look at the standard array up there that I showed you that from 2008, which is how textbooks are still done, the textbook manufacturers have to write to fit everybody's needs, that mile wide, inch deep. So the textbook my daughter had in Connecticut in the 3rd grade needs to have the same content in it that my sons in the 6th grade had, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So the textbook to teach algebra in Japan is about less than ½ an inch thick. Less than ½ an inch thick. More of the time is spent in the classroom doing the work under the guidance of the teacher, practicing, than going through a bunch of stuff. When you have the technology in the school system, what it enables you to do going forward, and also with common standards, is the state of Illinois and the districts, school districts, will have a huge choice on curriculum to use because it's all going to have to be built to the same standards. That means you'll have a ton of different competition out there, not specialized books. You'll also end up with online stuff that is much more intuitive to children today and teaches them in the world they're going to live in, that's being developed, that I think the state is now looking at, part of some consortiums, for freeware, open source material that will eliminate the cost of textbooks going forward. That's a huge cost to any school district, and the subsidies that typically come from the state level as well. So those two alone will, over time, pay back for the basic level of infrastructure. I also understand there's some work taking place around the bandwidth issues at the nationwide level and what space is available to help schools specifically allocated for educators. And I think, Chris, you may know more about that than I do.
Let me follow up. Another question here is, as people are moving both to train staff on Common Core and to find good materials, what can ISB do to help administrators find the best materials to retrain their faculties in how to teach to the new Common Core standards effectively? And a related question from somebody else in the audience was, does or does not Common Core dictate a certain curriculum? I mean, it's not a curriculum, but what's the relationship between Common Core and curriculum?
Sure. So in the first part of your question, in dealing with materials, first of all, the Common Core has opened a venue for us to be able to share materials among states. And many states received more money than us in federal competitions in developing such materials. We've already done some sharing. We have these available to us. We have an educator leader cadre in Illinois of Illinois teachers who have been involved in this for numerous years now in helping through our regional offices as well to get the word out about what's available. We have a professional learning series available. Again, a lot of good materials so that...
And is there a website on ISB's website?
Absolutely, on ISB's
Common
website.
Core, easy to navigate, very clear?
I think so, but let us know. Also, we've also contemplated, so that you know, the supply line. So we've been working with our higher ed institutions for now multiple years in raising the expectation and ensuring that the new supply of teachers coming out will already have this under their belt, and they won't have to just professional development their way through it or see it for the first time. And all of that was conceived, again, when these were first adopted in June of 2010. And in terms of your curriculum question, we'll have frameworks similar to how we do now to help lead folks from the standards into how they use these in the classroom. But there'll still be all sorts of choices to make around that. But we have frameworks available now. And again, that's what we had before, and that helps shape, but it doesn't dictate they have to do things in the same way everywhere. And
I'm curious about this both at the national level, and both Ed and Bob are engaged there, but also at the local level, where one of our members is interested, where do the teachers' unions come down on Common Core, and where do administrators and management groups, where are they coming down on this?
Robin, I think coming back was just reading again some material last night, knowing would be here with you today. Some of the studies that the AFT has done at surveying their own teachers, and a high percentage, well over 50, 60%, 70 if I recall the number correctly, very supportive of Common Core, because what they see is a greater clarity around what it is they're expected to do in the classroom, and back what Chris was saying, a more iterative learning way of how can we bring together best practices. It doesn't necessarily have to be within my school, my class, but rather what's going on within the district, across the state, or across the country to bring those learnings in. So, from a union standpoint, I think a large majority embrace it. It's not without a bit of anxiety, which is understandable whenever you go through change, but it is essential change. The other thing from a business standpoint, and Bob may elaborate on this, the business community in looking at the need, we need workers. We need people coming in across age spectrum, experience with skill sets that will allow them, one, to be productive in a reasonably short period of time coming in. We'll do initial training if need be. But they have got to have that skill, that collaborative communication, comprehension, a critical thinking skill, or otherwise they're going to have great difficulty in being employed. And the level of low-skill jobs, nominal skill jobs, if they haven't, they are rapidly going away.
Yeah, just a couple of points to reinforce that. The official position of the AFT, the American Federation of Teachers, which represents 1.5 million teachers in America, teachers and administrators, and the National Education Association, which represents about 3.5 million teachers and administrators in the educational system. Their official position is strongly supportive of the Common Core standard, strongly. They are ecstatic about this. Their teachers, when they know about it, and their data shows, when teachers know this and they learn them, they look at the standards, they're like, wow, that's great, that's what I want to do. The challenge, and where there's concern, is how fast is it implemented, how well are my teachers prepared, and are you going to start to measure me on how well the students learn on this when I don't even know it yet and you're going to fire me? That's in one long run-on sentence.
That segues perfectly into one of the other
questions. Let me just ask one thing, though, to follow up on Ed's.
I'm going to screw up my segue, but go ahead.
That's okay. And I just saw this data yesterday from the NGA. In 1964, 90% of jobs in the United States required only a high school degree or graduate or less. 92%.
That's how Ed got where he did.
But that same data today is 41%. And of the 41% with a high school degree or less required, 2/3 of those jobs earn less than $25,000 a year. And so that's basically $12 an hour. So when you look at the economy, the need by businesses like Ed's and GE, and more, and every business out there, is you need trained or trainable people. And the standards are not simply college standards, they're career-ready, training-ready. Go look at the electrician's standard or the electrical code for Illinois. Go look at the plumbing code for Illinois. Go look at what you need to operate an NC machine or something else. You need to be able to interpret.
So now I'm going to segue to one of the other questions. And for the one who I didn't segue into, I'll try to get back to it. But the one I'm going to segue into is with statistics like this, with information like this, with hard, cold reality like this, what makes it hard? It seems like we've still got a lot of work to do with business leaders, with lawmakers and legislators to really understand that this investment has got to be made. And you've heard already, folks, there's going to have to be some investments. So we've done some of the work, but there is still work and investment to be done. And in lean times, and when you've got the issues that Illinois does, that means we've got to do some talking. What's the barrier? And that question was particularly directed at the two of you as sort of business and civic folks. What are the barriers to persuading when you've got that kind of information?
Well, barriers is getting people with a desire to have to learn and understand the issue. Some of the way we've kicked it around times that how do we help parents and communities become better consumers of the education system, of not referring back to what it was like when I went through school. That should be good enough for our kids today. Couldn't be further from the truth. What are we doing to update our own thinking around the skill sets that kids are going to need tomorrow, next year, and beyond in their career to really be able to survive? It's that kind of updating, and what we've tried to do is push that information out through our intranet connectivity with our employees, as well as involvement with community groups and similar efforts.
Right. And Jeff, I know, will speak a little more to this, so I will do one last question, Chris, for you before we turn it over. One of the things, Bob, that you mentioned is the concern isn't support for Common Core standards, and that's certainly been consistent with what we've heard. And there is a coalition of groups, Common Core Illinois, here in Illinois. It includes the teachers' unions, management groups, community groups, the United Way, the PTA. I mean, anybody you can shake a stick at is saying, look, we need to be doing this. The concerns are what you said. How quickly can we get there? Are we going to support it properly? And what kind of curriculum and support? So my question to you, Chris, is what is the transition going to look like? And are we doing everything we need to as a state to help? How speedy is this taking place? Too fast, too slow, just right?
Well, the speed ties to the barrier question. I mean, one of the issues that we have is we're doing this at a time when we've not funded public education, where it's had over $800 million in cuts in 3 years. This past year, there was a little ground gained, but our school districts are still dealing with a prorated amount of a promise from the state. So in light of that, a lot of anxieties and changes, it makes everything harder, and you have to listen very carefully to what the field's experienced and then calibrate the speed by which we're moving. But we are on a trajectory here. We've held course, we've communicated it well. I think folks know it's coming. We've raised the cut score on the ISAT this year, and we're fully aligning the current test. This was all designed to be sequential, to get folks ready. We had 20% incorporation last year, not popular things, And that also requires a lot of communication and clarification to the public. You know, that's something that we're going to have to continually work on. All these things are moving us towards a higher expectation and a full implementation of something that's not easy, but it's the right thing to do for our kids.
There's so much more we could talk about, but our time is up, and I want to do, can I ask everybody to join me in thanking our panel for taking the time?